Welcome to the Future Sense podcast with Steve McDonald and Nick Jeans, broadcast weekly from our Future Sense pod in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales, Australia, and available on your favourite podcast platforms or directly through rd.org/futuresense. That's ADII.org. And you can follow us on Twitter at Future Sense Show or on our Facebook page. Thanks for joining us today.
In this episode, we're going to talk about body awareness at layer 7. So this is the first step into second-tier consciousness, and something that is still relatively rare on the planet. The percentage of people who have transitioned into second tier is not overly large, and that's, of course, related to the complexity of life conditions. As all the layers are, we adapt to a certain level of complexity to match our life conditions. So a certain percentage of people way back in the 1950s had already transitioned into second tier consciousness and were recorded in the research of Dr. Claire W. Graves. However, it was a relatively small number of people within his research group.
And less than 1%, wasn't it? It was like 7 out of 1,065 or so.
Actually, that was layer 8.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah, I don't have exact numbers for layer 7. But layer 8, there were only 6 out of 1,065, which is not many at all. And unfortunately, some of Dr. Graves's documents were destroyed in a fire some years ago. So we don't have all of the statistics that we'd like to have. But suffice to say that there were people around back then. And if we look at written history, you know, there's evidence of people around the turn of the century, like at the beginning of the 1900s, who were starting to think in a second tier way and talking about stuff like quantum mechanics, developmental psychology, and those sorts of things with a multi-dimensional focus.
And it's those sciences which reflect that emerging transition into the second tier, aren't they? Things like quantum physics, for example,
exactly.
And other kinds of energetic science that is now prevalent on the planet significantly now.
Yeah, so no one knows exactly how many people are operating from second tier layers right now, but suffice to say there'll certainly be some people out there who are doing that. And we in the last episode we spoke about particularly wellness in layer 6, so the evolution of personal care at layer 6, and we're continuing on from that just to start to talk about layer 7, and because there are certainly probably quite a large number of people who are at layer 6 now and are in that transition phase of moving to layer 7. So to have a little bit of advanced knowledge of what is just up ahead, you know, is very, very useful.
And some of those simple practices of self-care we were mentioning in the last episode are kind of the ground, I think, for the newer emerging technologies that are going to help and create a better health for us on the planet and together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Simple things like, just as I mentioned, just standing on the ground, you know, and doing old practices like qigong and yoga. These are basically tuning into the energetic systems of the body, aren't they?
They are actually doing that, and layer 7 and second tier in general is very much about integration. So one of the things that shifts is, instead of being quite biased to either left or right brain functions, as we are in the first tier of consciousness, when we make this transition to layer 7, for the first time we get an integrated operation of left and right brain, which brings a very expanded capacity of awareness and expanded coping capacity as well.
Because that capacity in second tier then encompasses, with that left-right brain balance, encompasses all the other layers below, doesn't it, to one degree or another? So those that are dominant right or dominant left, actually all of them are at the service of, when needed, that intelligence or that consciousness that is from the second tier. Yeah,
exactly. And for the first time at layer 7, we're actually aware that the layers are there, whereas when we're in first tier, we can learn about it by listening to a podcast that these layers exist, but we don't have a direct sense within ourselves, you know, of being able to feel and sense these different layers. But that comes with this transition to layer 7. All of a sudden we're aware, and we can consciously move ourselves down through the layers in order to meet people where they're at, or, you know, solve a problem that requires thinking from a particular layer. So from a wellness and a medicine point of view, there's a saying that goes, physics is the new medicine. And that's very, very applicable to the way that we perceive the world at layer 7. The body's electromagnetic energy fields are central to our understanding, and we have this strange phenomena which starts to take place as we move into second tier consciousness, which is known as light body activation, which probably sounds a bit fluffy and new age to a lot of people. But there's a wonderful body of work by an Japanese American by the name of Dr. Mikio Sankey, who's written 7 books from a Chinese medicine perspective on how the body's energetic structure is augmented as we shift into second tier. And most people who are familiar with alternative medicine and Eastern practices will know about the chakra system and the meridian systems that are described in Indian and Chinese medicine. And these are characteristic of the first tier energetic structure of the body. And then when we move into second tier, we get this overlay of complex geometry, which doesn't replace what's already there. It enhances, it's added to what's already there. And this is the nature of our growth, is that we grow through these layers, and each new layer that we develop is placed over what's already there. So the whole set is a nest, like the Russian dolls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, we mention often places like the HeartMath Institute in particular, which has been working on this area of human beingness and health for many years, for a generation or more. And particularly with the word coherence, which is why I mentioned there that word coherence, which is, I guess, like integration. And that's what we're really looking for, isn't it, in second tier, is that coherence between all these different polarities or aspects of ourselves.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the process that we go through at layer 6, which is like the bookend of the first tier, it's the end of the first tier of human existence. We go through a process of preparing ourselves and preparing our body for this great leap in capacity. So it's like we have to focus internally on our own well-being and our own healing and go right back down through all of the layers. And I might just mention here that there is a direct correspondence between the chakras and the chakra numbers and these layers of consciousness. So layer 1, chakra 1, layer 5, chakra 5. And yeah, it's like we've got to look back through the whole lot, and we've got to just attend to anything that needs repair or needs resolution, whether that be some kind of childhood trauma or whatever. Sufficient that we have a solid foundation to make this leap from. And it doesn't mean that we have to be perfect. It doesn't mean that we have to heal, everything in our history, but we need to have sufficient foundation there to support this higher order operation that emerges at layer 7.
That's a really important point, I think, because I think many people feel that they have to be perfect one way or the other. They have to physically be perfect, or mentally or emotionally. They've dealt with all their stuff, as you said, and whatever. They've dealt with their past life karma, even, all that package. But it's not really necessary to be perfect, is it?
No, it's not. And it's also important to remember that this is a dynamic system. So in the book that they wrote about Claire Graves' work, the book was called Spiral Dynamics, because we travel up through these layers in a spiraling developmental fashion. And what that means in practical terms is that we go through like circles of change, and the change dynamic, or the change journey, or the change cycle, is an example of how that plays out, that we've spoken about many times before on the show, where we start at a place of stability at the old system, and then we go through stress in response to our changing life conditions. Eventually, we're pushed into a place of transformation, which can often feel like chaos. Then there's a breakthrough, and then we have a high energy renewal phase. And with proper integration, we end up stable at the next value system or layer. And so that's what the terrain looks like in between the layers. And that can take years to play out, that transition process. And of course, we can have periods of stability where we're not actually, going through the change process. Particularly once we're matching the complexity of our life conditions with our own internal operating system, then there's no need for change. It's only when the life conditions become more complex or less complex, that we are drawn either up or down that spiral of development. And so it's important to remember that, if you're living life according to layer 6 as your operating system at the moment, you're not going to be there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are going to be times when you will automatically and quite subconsciously switch to operate from different layers to match the life conditions where you are. The most obvious example of that is going from a corporate workplace into a home situation where you've got kids and family to interact with, and you're not going to behave the same way, hopefully not anyway.
Suddenly you're not the CEO anymore, it's the 3-year-old. She's the CEO.
That's right. And try as you might, they just won't follow the orders.
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly. So even when we're going through this transition to and beginning to operate in second tier, there will still be times when we fall out of that. And that can be very, very noticeable because it is such a big change from first tier to second tier. When you fall out of layer 7 and back into first tier, it's very prominent, very noticeable that happens.
I guess one of the big changes that has come, and I guess it starts in layer 6 and moves into second tier, is the notion of what you've called the smart body, and that awareness of the body as a connecting point, so to speak, between all things, that connectivity, as we said earlier. And I think someone once said, the human is the connection between heaven and earth, which is probably sounds like a qigong kind of thing to say.
Very much.
But we are actually really that transforming point in creation, one could argue, and that requires us to become conscious that we are body, mind, spirit, soul, all parts of us are actually smart. We actually have an intelligence about us. And we're starting to discover these things. And obviously some of the technologies that are used in layer 6 and a bit before that are beginning to show us the direction that we're going with it, with emerging technologies. As you're saying, physics is a new medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I might just add in there too that one of the things that's changing at the moment is our understanding of history. And we've come from an era where history was very linear. It was often designed by the victors and written to benefit them in particular ways. I think
that's the definition of the word history, isn't it? Written by the victors.
I think so, yeah.
His story.
But what we are starting to discover is that there were people way back in history who did have activated life bodies, and people way back in history who had access to extraordinary technologies that can do things that we can't do today. And so our whole concept of like this linear evolutionary progression is shifting somehow, and I don't think anybody's quite cracked the absolute answer or the current answer anyway. But it's in transition, I might say. So there are stories in history books of people who seem to have had an activated light body, and there are stories from the Christian Bible, for example, of people ascending in a light body,
or living for 900 years or so, like Methuselah,
something like that.
Obviously, had some sort of technology going on to do that.
Yeah. So it's good to keep an open mind on those things for sure. We did talking about the light body stuff. We did cover this way back in episode number 9 with our special guest, Dr. Stephen Booth, which was called Future Humans, and Stephen Booth has had the pleasure of actually training directly with Mickey Sankey, who wrote these 7 books on the way that our energetic structure changes as we grow through and to the second tier levels. So you might want to go back and revisit episode number 9 if you're interested in more about the light body activation stuff, and we'll certainly be doing more on it in the future as well. But back to the innate intelligence. So one good reference for this is Cryon's book number 14. And for those of you who might not have heard us talking about Cryon before, Cryon is a very alternative information source who is an entity channeled by an American called Lee Carroll. And Lee Carroll's been channeling messages from Cryon for, I think, over 30 years now. It has an extraordinarily good record of predicting the future, and particularly predicting future scientific breakthroughs. In fact, I'm not aware of any time when one of Cryon's predictions has been incorrect. And in book 14, which is Cryon's latest book, and the book is just a collection of channelings that have taken place over the last sort of, I think, maybe 7 or 8 years or so. but they're all about how humanity and how humans are changing. The book is called The New Human, Quran Book 14, so you might want to grab that and take a look at it. But one of the things that he's talking about in there is this emergence of or connection with the innate intelligence of the body. And so in the transition from layer 6 to layer 7, we are completing the activation of our energy centers. So if you think about the traditional understanding of energy centers as the 7 chakras within the body, the first being the base chakra between the legs, and the 7th being around the crown, and the crown of the head, that is. And as we grow through the layers of consciousness, we are activating the relevant numbered chakra. So if we're growing through layer 3 in Graves' system, we're activating chakra 3 and opening it up. And so over time, as we live through the whole first tier of human layers, we end up with 6 activated chakras, up to and including the pineal gland. And for those of you who might not be aware, each one of the chakras or energy centers within the body is centered upon a particular gland.
Yes.
And then the transition to second tier comes with the activation of the 7th chakra, which then means that the heart chakra is the center of the 7. So when you've got a set of 7 activated, the 4th is the center of that pattern, which is our heart. And Cryon in Book 14 talks about what he calls the triad brain. And it's basically giving us an updated understanding of what we think our brain does and how our body is activated. And he talks about the conventional understanding of the brain as being like the first level of this 3 aspects of the brain. So that the sort of conventional idea that the brain is a collection of synapses, and we use it to think and come up with ideas and those sorts of things, is what he calls the first part of the triad brain. And he says it's a remarkable survival tool. There's no doubt about that, and it's responsible for our thoughts and, of course, all of the mechanical control of our body's functions. And then the second part of the triad brain is the pineal gland. And so with the completion of or growing through layer 6, we're activating this 6th chakra or energy center in the head. And what that's doing as it activates is it's starting to move us out of survival mode, because remember that the first 6 layers of human consciousness in that first tier of consciousness are really in different ways focused on surviving. And it's really just, how do I survive in this world, from this particular perspective. And so with the activation of the 6th, we're starting to move beyond pure survival mode. And we can see that happening now with the way society is changing, and we are being taken out of this mad rat race where we're just totally stressed all the time and working too hard, most of us, to simply survive in the world and nothing much more. Apart from a small percentage of humanity, most people are really just in survival mode. And so with layer 6 comes this time to contemplate, time to reassess, time to heal, and that is slowly drawing us out of survival mode and into being mode, which is what Claire Graves called the second tier.
Well, I have here, as you said, the correspondence between the 6th layer and the chakras in the Hindu tradition. The third eye chakra, which is related to that, is the Ajna chakra. And when the Ajna chakra is blocked, according to the Hindus, you have uncertainty, confusion, jealousy, cynicism, and pessimism. When you start to open the third eye, we perceive reality differently, and clarity, intuition, empathy, focus, and decisiveness emerges, which immediately I thought, that's interesting, those qualities, because they're left and right brain. You've got intuition and empathy, which are arguably a right brain. You've got focus and decisiveness, arguably left brain. Clarity, maybe both. So you've actually got that expression, as we were saying earlier, as the 6th chakra, as the pineal gland opens up to these higher qualities, which are definitely doorways and gateways to the second tier.
Yeah. Yeah, and Cryon in the book I just mentioned, he's saying that the sixth chakra, the pineal gland, we can think of it as an internet connection to higher knowledge. It's responsible for our creativity and intuition, which fits with what you said from the Indian tradition.
Lucid dreaming, astral projection,
exactly,
imagination.
Yeah, exactly. And Cryon says it's also our spiritual or interdimensional connection to the creative source, which fits exactly with that wisdom from that great tradition, which is fantastic. It also opens us up to past life remembrances. And in the previous episode, we were talking a little bit about the space-time conceptualization and how that shifts. And in layer 6, where we tend to think in circular ways, and that in itself is a preparation for the shift into layer 7, where that circle is going to go from 2 dimensions, it's going to pop out into 3 dimensions, and all of a sudden we've got a spiral, and so we're in a spiraling conceptualization in second tier. So I've been talking about this triad brain concept from Cryon's book 14. The third part of that is the heart itself, which of course is associated with the fourth chakra. And Cryon says the heart is the largest electromagnetic field of all the organs. It influences more than medical science understands currently. And one example of that is if you look at cases of people who've had their spinal cord cut, you'll find that many parts of the body continue to function normally, including the heart, the digestive system, all sorts of different systems. So that's a little clue that it's actually not the brain inside our skull that's controlling those things, but the heart itself. And as I was saying before, once we grow through layer 6 and activate layer 7, then the heart becomes the energetic center of our self, and then this opens up the way for the activation of the light body geometry. And the seventh chakra, which is centered on the pituitary gland, it's often called the master gland because part of its function is to oversee the functions of all the other glands as well. So it's like a master energy center. Once that kicks in, the heart becomes our center. And I think, as you said, the Heart Math Institute have done a remarkable amount of research, and I really commend their work if you want to look at the heart field and the energy patterns associated with that. And also they've started to gather a lot of evidence in studies, I think, with Princeton University as well, into intuition and deep sensing capacities that come.
And of course, things like biofeedback, which are quite well known, but that's another area which is exactly accessing that smart body. Once you start to get the biofeedback information, you can consciously choose to manipulate, if you will, to change parameters in your body that are maybe out of balance in somewhere or other by biofeedback.
Yeah.
So it's amazing that education that's coming along, that we actually can, just by focusing and understanding and having that kind of awareness moving within us about our body, we can know what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And each time we grow to a new layer of consciousness, our sensory perception is enhanced in some way. And in this leap to second tier, we really get amazingly detailed awareness of what's going on in our body, really right down to a cellular level, as you say, which is quite extraordinary. The other thing that is shifting in this process is the functioning of our DNA. And again, in Cryon's book 14, he says that our DNA in first tier consciousness is really only working at about 30% capacity. And there are multidimensional properties to our DNA, which have been shown in some research over the years. I think there's I think it's a Russian study that looked at what they called phantom DNA, where in a lab they had some DNA in a test tube and they measured the presence of it with energetic instruments, and then they took the DNA out of where it was, but the energetic signature was still there. Yeah. So science is just starting to sort of edge into that understanding of the multi-dimensional properties that our DNA has, and so part of what's going on in this transition into layer 7 and second tier is the activation of more of our DNA structure, and along with that, the personal awareness of the functioning of our DNA through direct sensing. And the impact of that can include things like slowing down the aging process and also enhancing the intelligence of our immune system, but really enhancing our body's intelligence and opening up this innate intelligence, as Cryon calls it, or the smart body.
Yes.
That we can interact with and have more control over. So it really means more conscious control of the body. And to quote Cryon, you will have a far better idea of what's going on at a cellular level. That's what he said.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because you're not going to hear it in the same way, and that's another topic in a sense. But we all have our way of listening to our intuition and understanding it. There's not really a frame for that, as far as I can see. It feels like everybody has a different access point, and to find that what works for you in those modalities. I know you talk. I think you've got up here about that innate intelligence, things like dowsing, for example. That's my terminology. Other methodologies where you can actually, and kinesiology is what you were going to mention before, I think too. Things like those sort of biofeedback, natural techniques that you can adopt. Yeah,
the testing, muscle testing that they use in kinesiology is an example of tapping into that innate bodily intelligence. And again, Cryon talks about this connection between the innate body and what he calls the Akash, which is really the quantum field, the structure of space-time where all knowledge resides. And so once we open up access to that, you can literally pull information from that quantum field.
Akashic records.
Exactly. And that probably sounds quite weird to a lot of people, but one way of thinking of it is just having really good intuition, and just, we all probably know somebody who's got good intuition these days. There's plenty of people around, and just somebody who will just know, and they don't have to go through a thought process or, any logical process. It's just, they just know.
And I think, and just to, because I think it's important to, because many people feel challenged by the fact that other people have that kind of intuitive abilities at times, but just to affirm that you have your own access point somewhere. Maybe you haven't found it yet, or maybe you're still researching that, or inside yourself, listening to your body, understanding that maybe you're working on evolving and developing that. But to know that we've all got that capacity is really important.
It is really important, yeah. And sometimes. I know in my own developmental process, I can remember times when that was developing, and I had a number of people. I used to be married to a psychic, so I had that kind of intuitive advice on tap, and I was told on a number of occasions, you are getting the messages, you're just not hearing them, or you're not listening to them. And probably other people, listening to the podcast have had that advice too. You're just not listening to your intuition. And it is there, and it is a really nuanced process of listening and starting to relate to the mildest senses, or the mildest sort of levels of sensory input. It's kind of like somebody pointing out to you, just stop for a moment. Can you hear that bird in a distance, in the distance, or can you hear something in the distance? And it was always there, and you could always hear it, but you never actually put your attention to it. And so for me, this, development of that contact with the innate and the intuition has been like that. It's been like, oh yeah, actually, now that you mention it, and this is something that you can practice day to day, is really start to take notice of those very, very subtle messages that you get, and particularly when they have implications, And how many people have you heard say something like, I knew I shouldn't have done that, but I just didn't take notice of it.
Yeah, that refinement is really happening, and it reminds me of the opposite of that. You could say is practices in old spiritual traditions, like the Zen stick. When you're sort of falling asleep in your meditation, and the master will come up and whack you across the shoulder or something with a stick,
exactly.
Literally.
Yeah.
We don't really need that anymore, hopefully.
No, that's kind of old school. I mean, you can do it if you want to, but it's kind of old school. So with the gift of this awareness, and as we're saying, it is a learning process that you've got to go through, and everybody, given their life conditions, being supportive to the development of this layer of consciousness, and really the whole planet is shifting into this at the moment. So, many of us already have access to life conditions sufficiently complex to stimulate these extra awareness, these extra perceptions and senses. It's just a matter of really having the discipline to stop and listen and pay attention. And you'll find that as life moves on the planet, it's going to become harder and harder to solve problems in the old ways. And the only way that we're going to be able to solve our problems or avoid problems in the future is to really tap into these deep senses.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly in this era we've been living through in 2020, these few months of lockdown and so forth. That's exactly the opportunity, because we can't work it out in the same way that we have before. And as you're speaking, I'm feeling how many times now, as I'm living in my life, where I'm thinking I'm trying to work something out and I just drop it because you can't do it. If you try and work out what the hell's going on the planet, for example, that's very difficult. So just let go. And that letting go allows a capacity to emerge in you for other sort of higher level information to come through. I also think things like gratitude are really useful in creating a bit more ground for these things to emerge. Simple things like that, simple mental practices which allow you to have reverence for life, reverence for your journey, reverence for the journey of the others in your reality, also creates a platform for higher intelligences to emerge, I think. My experience, anyway.
I agree, absolutely. And there are so many teachers who have said, be here now, be in the present moment. And what they're really saying is pay attention.
Yeah, that's right.
Pay attention to what's here right now. Because if you're thinking about the past or thinking about the future, then you're quite likely missing these subtle cues that we're talking about that are coming from your higher intelligence. And through this process of the activation of that triune brain and the emergence of a different energetic structure in terms of your body's subtle energy. So it really is a different ballgame. Once this starts to activate and you can tap into that deep knowing, then you don't need to live by someone else's rule set anymore. And so instead of looking on the internet to find the best diet that you can find to try and, fix something in your body or change the way that you are, you just simply listen to your body. And when you're about to eat, notice, how does your body feel when you're about to eat this thing that's sitting on a plate in front of you? Does it feel good? Is it kind of giving you any cues as to whether you should or shouldn't eat it? How does your body react when you taste the food? Sometimes you put a piece of food in your mouth and you go, oh my God, that tastes so good. I really need to have some more of that. I guess that message can be coming from different directions, but if it's coming from your higher intuition, then it's telling you that this
you might
is
need a few layers of intuition to get to the truth somewhere.
That's right.
To do that. I mean, it's great what you're saying. So I'm currently got a bit of a sort of regimen going, but not like it was a research regimen to do with all the stuff we're talking about. Exactly that. But I'm finding that some of the things that I had, which I notice now, I may have purchased because I thought it was the right thing rather than having that intuitive response to it. Now I'm finding that I'm not using it. Like I forgot to put something in my smoothie. I'm going and again, oh, it was that again. I guess I don't need that.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And in terms of the whole operating system and the whole way of being, it brings you to a place of being far more present to what's happening right now. And then that also allows you, and you've got a whole bunch of sort of available conceptual space that you didn't have before. So you can think about a whole lot more things at the same time. But it allows you to tap into the natural rhythm of life. And by being in the moment, you are opening yourself to go with the natural flow of things and noticing what's working. Particularly, that's a very strong theme in Layer 7, is going with what works, noticing what works and doing more of that, and noticing what doesn't work and not wasting your time trying to do things that don't work also. But some of the other practical sort of results of operating in that space are that you have an element of conscious control of your body's systems, including your immune system. I know I've had occasions where I have immediately sensed a pathogen in my body, and then been able to take very, very quick action to deal with it straight away, rather than having to wait to get sick. So there's a capacity that emerges to moderate the body's responses. So, sometimes you might get overwhelmed by a response the body has, and you have more control over that when you're operating in a second tier space. And also it's leading us to ask, a whole bunch of new questions as well. And a lot of this also is emerging as we transit through layer 6, is, thinking about the food that we eat. Where did it come from? How natural is it? How processed is it? How good does it feel once it gets in your body? And how we might want to change society and our farming systems and our food production systems, where we get our food from. So at this time in history too, we really have an opportunity now to reimagine life. I mean, talk about a blessing in disguise. No doubt the whole COVID-19 epidemic and the response to it have had a huge impact on many, many people around the world. Some people have died as a result of it. So, it's not all... It's not all beer and Skittles, as they say, but there's an element of opportunity that it's opened up as well. And for many people, it has been a blessing in disguise, because it's basically pressed the pause button on the rat race, allowed us to sit at home and think about how do we want to live life in the future, and how are we going to reimagine life. And I'm sure a lot of people probably won't go back to the way that they were living before.
No, and as you're speaking, I'm thinking here in front of me, I have a little note about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems, because, again, this is another figure, and it's a very well-known one, of our existence as human beings. And the sympathetic nervous system, of course, is responsible for the fight, flight, or freeze response that we have when we are in danger. This is a natural and very ancient response that came when we were sort of chased by the tiger down into the cave. And the parasympathetic nervous system, which is all about resting and digesting and taking in what you've got, and being able to sit with, stay with, and take time out from and be in that space. Now, obviously, in our world these days, in the 21st century, the sympathetic nervous system for most people is aggravated, it's out of balance, it's overstimulated for all reasons. And I think this opportunity that we've had in this period is an opportunity to really tune into the parasympathetic nervous system, and to have or to find or to negotiate practices which can help you tune to that rather than the sympathetic response.
Yeah, I agree, Nick. And on a global scale, where the majority of the world is shifting from the scientific industrial layer 5 to the humanistic network centric layer 6, and the big theme there is about balancing, which applies directly to what you're saying there. So, as most of the world is in the process of creating a layer 6 society, rebalancing things is a central theme right there.
Yeah. Very good. I think that's it for this week.
I think that'll do us, yeah.
Thanks for joining us here again, and you'll hear that again, and listen to us continually. We do. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. You've been listening to the Future Sense podcast with Nick Jeans and futurist Steve McDonald, broadcast weekly. We're also happy to be liked or loved on the platform that you're listening to right now, and we welcome feedback, comments, and input. Thanks for joining us. And remember that the future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed.